Hi, I'm Joe Saunders with Miniature Landscape Hobbies, and in this episode, I'm going to show you 3 essential tips that will take your miniature painting skills from good to awesome. Let's get to it. Miniature Landscape Hobbies is proudly supported by these sponsors. Have you ever encountered one of those miniatures on display or in a wargame that just demands your attention? Or perhaps maybe it's been a whole army, or terrain, or an entire games table that you just can't take your eyes off of. Now when you think about these pieces, compare them to your own work. And be honest about it. Do your models have that quality that makes them pop, or just really entertain the eye? Do you even want to be able to do this? Because, let's face it, it takes time, and it's not necessary to enjoy a wargame. But on the other hand, they're just so cool. Let's take a look at this phenomena another way. As an experienced wargamer, you can appreciate a model on several levels, as art, as a component with particular qualities that affect the game, and so forth. But can your work cause someone who doesn't know the difference between a Sherman tank and a Lehman Russ stop to admire it? Is your miniature art truly visually compelling? Is it a thing of beauty to behold without having to identify with its purpose in a game? I think most miniature painters long for developing this quality, but they may not know where to begin. And I have to say, to develop the wow factor for your work, you need time and practice, a level of commitment that the average person may just not be able to have. And to be honest, sometimes the plans for your work just don't pan out. But what if there was a shortcut? Maybe a couple of silver bullet type techniques that could give you an unfair advantage to reach new artistic levels without the years of practice. That would be pretty cool, right? But surely such a thing doesn't exist. Well, I'm happy to tell you that these techniques do exist, and they're not too hard to do when you know about them. In this video, I'm going to share with you 3 of these essential techniques, or more specifically, 3 essential theories that you can use when you want to take your work to the next level. What am I talking about? I'm talking about using complementary color, creating environmental context, and building contrast. All of these are easy to do, and right now I'm going to show you how. Let's get to it. What would be your ultimate bucket list item as a miniature builder or model painter? How about traveling to the miniature gaming capital of the world? For exclusive tours, discussions, and events with some of the top miniature companies in the world, including tours of Warhammer World and the Warlord Games HQ. While we're at it, it would be great to throw in some stops to the UK branch of the Battlefront Miniatures store and visits to other wargaming companies. On top of this, we'll see all the major military and historical sites in the UK, including a visit to the incomparable Bovington Tank Museum. Such a once-in-a-lifetime travel event is no longer just a dream, because from March 7th to March 16th, 2025, I'm inviting you to accompany me on this incredible trip. This one-of-a-kind travel experience designed for the dedicated miniature hobbyist and their spouses or guests is now available for my viewers. Please check the link in the video description. I hope to see you on the trip. Before you paint a model, you need to start with a plan. Because I'm a historical painter, this may often be simplified, because I'll often have a real-world topic to paint from. But there's a lot more to color selection than just copying what you see. When I have a model's color scheme worked out, I now go ahead and look at my paints to select the right ones. It's at this point that anyone can use a trick that develops a visual harmony that's pleasing to the viewer, and we can do this in a way which is pretty much foolproof. To do this, we can pick out a complementary color. In order to pick out a complementary color, you need to look at your composition. What's the dominant color? That is, which color is in the largest proportion on the model. Here's a Napoleonic rifleman. His uniform is green, so this is dominant. But what would be the next color we should use? Well, it's the complementary one, and to figure out which color to apply, I go to a color wheel. If you don't have one handy, you can just Google it. Now you find the dominant color and see what's directly across from it. The color you find there is the complementary one. So in this example, we check our wheel and we find green. Then we look across from it and get red. Armed with this knowledge, we can now plan out a spot to add the complement, red. His officer's sash will do, and a cluster of red flowers can also be used for good measure. With the complement added, the model just looks better and more balanced. Our brains are designed to find certain color pairings pleasing, and we can use this to our advantage. Don't ask me why this works. That's for fine artists and biologists to explain. But the power of complementary colors is well established, and we can use it as kind of low-hanging fruit for creating good composition. Let's look at a couple more examples. Here are some Napoleonic French Marines of the Guard. The dominant color on these is quite obvious, blue. Looking at the color wheel, we see that the complement is orange trending to yellow. So naturally, we paint yellowy orange on the trim, braid, etc., and now the model just looks great. The challenge with complementary color is finding an excuse to use it. On a fantasy or sci-fi subject, it's easy because we can just paint according to imagination. But with historical subjects, we need to be creative. My favorite subject to paint is historical tanks. These, no matter what the era or type, are almost always some shade of green. But green needs red as a complement, and you don't see many tanks with actual red markings on them. So we have to hunt for spots to work red in. Over the years, I've developed two go-to solutions for this that you might want to use yourself. The first is rust. A lot of tanks have rust on them. Rust is red. Problem solved. The red doesn't have to be the exact opposite color on the wheel. A similar hue, common to the complement, will still work. My other go-to option is good for modern or factory fresh tanks where there should be no rust. Just pick out visible sensors or vision blocks in red. These details are small but significant and will add the balance the viewer's brains will want because though the red parts are small, they are still there. Before we leave this topic, I need to caution you. What you need to avoid is sticking the complementary color too far away from the central focus of the subject. Here's a lancer. He's green, so his complementary color again should be red. But the red is way up the lance, away from the model. This is really too far from the main subject to work compositionally. Fortunately, or rather unfortunately, these red and white pennants are required to be historically correct, but the effects of the complementary red are more or less wasted all the way up there and out of the way from the model itself. Finally, before we get to the next tip, I need to mention that complementary colors are only one of many aspects of color theory that works really well on miniatures. You can use triads or a host of other concepts in your work. I'm not going to cover them all in this episode, but you might want to explore color theory some more on your own and use it as a great option to make your work even better. The human brain is designed to make connections between things it observes. This happens on both a conscious and subconscious level and is part of the reason why we can spot when something looks just wrong or off. Anyone will be constantly evaluating what they see and will be checking it against their experience to see if what they are observing fits with their notion of what is correct or expected. We can't escape this, and since the miniature we create is supposed to be, at least superficially, analogous to objects in reality, then we need to take this phenomena into account with our work. The main way we can do this is by considering the environment the model belongs in. Here's a tank, a Panzer IV. This vehicle's pretty big and likely belongs in a war zone, so the viewer would expect some mud, grime, and damage on it. Since it's pristine, though, we're more likely to think that it looks out of place. It just doesn't conform to the idea of what we might think a tank is. Tanks belong in battle, so we expect them to look that way, either consciously or unconsciously, and we usually need to paint our subject accordingly. Similarly, this can work backwards. Here's Napoleon in his Emperor of France years. We recognize that, despite the fact that he's a military man, he's unlikely to be crawling in the mud, being splattered with blood from close combat, and so forth, that other soldiers might experience. Such things don't really seem appropriate for a character of his station, so we don't paint him this way. He looks pretty neat and clean here, but so he should be, as he likely travels with numerous attendants and doesn't conduct charges with the rank and file, no matter what Ridley Scott would have us believe. What I'm getting at here is that we need to think carefully about our miniatures and add some details that would be fitting for the world in which they live. In other words, we need to build context through environmental effects. This might sound technical, but it doesn't have to be. Let me give you 2 super easy techniques to assist you with this. The first is weathering, which really shouldn't be a surprise. This is the process of adding a little grime and dirt to suggest that the model is in fact in an environment where it belongs. To start, consider what type of earth or mud is in the vicinity where the model should be. Then pick out an appropriate color of acrylic paint and load it on an old brush. Now wipe away the paint until you have an amount maybe just slightly heavier than that you would have if you were dry brushing. And now you can roughly stipple and brush this on around boots, tracks, wheels, and areas where mud and dirt and dust would accumulate. Don't overdo it, however, and I suggest you go over your first pass with a slightly lighter version in order to imply drier layers of earth. This is dead simple, and it looks great. The second technique is chipping. Damage and wear and tear should apply to almost any miniature subject, so chipping and scratching is useful. To do this, get a piece of packing foam and tear out a chunk. Load this with paint that's slightly lighter than the layer it's going over. Unload the foam on some paper until it's just transferring dots, and begin to apply this to areas where the viewer would expect wear and tear to occur. When this is done, you can follow up with a fine brush, applying smaller dots of a different color into the lighter ones to imply deep chips and scratches. This method works really well when combined with the complementary colors which we've already discussed. You can often add a complementary hue as the darker color in the center of each chip, which will make the color scheme pop and establish that the model belongs in a certain environment at the same time. Small objects gather less light than big objects. This should be pretty obvious, and this simple fact is the main artistic consideration that sets miniature painting apart from most other artistic pursuits. Even the most uninitiated painter likely understands this, and we compensate by layering midtones over base colors, and then we finish off with highlights. This is where most miniature painters stop, but there is one more key step that boosts the contrast, darkening the shadows, which in turn makes the specific details on the model that much sharper. Without this distinct contrast, the details on miniatures tend to blend together and get lost in the composition. The result, of course, is a loss of visual interest, where key elements that describe the model are not readily apparent. Experienced miniature painters understand this and often compensate through different shading processes. Of the techniques to do this, There's one go-to technique that'll always help make the details perfectly sharp. Lining in. What is this? It's when you take a dark color, usually black but sometimes a dark brown, and outline the details on the model in order to make them distinct from each other and therefore more readable to the viewer. The process seems straightforward. Paint black around the details and be done with it. But this is easier said than done. Sometimes you can just thin an acrylic paint, or better yet an ink, to the right consistency and go in with a fine brush. But this is honestly situational according to the shape of the subject. Plus, this may take a very long time, and if you're batch painting your work, it's pretty inefficient. Beyond this, details might be hard to reach, or could be so small that it's difficult to brush around them correctly. But don't worry, there's a solution to all this. Let me explain how to do it. First, apply a gloss or satin varnish to all your work. You should wait to do this step until near the end of your job when all the small details are finished. When the varnish is dry, you need 3 things: a bottle of mineral spirits or other oil paint thinner, a bottle of panel lining enamel, and a flat brush. I use a Tamiya panel liner, which has its own applicator, but if you use a different product, you'll also need a fine point brush with a fairly long set of bristles on it. First, you take the flat brush and moisten it with the thinner. Then brush this over the surface of your model. You want the brush moist enough to coat the surface slightly, but not to pool. Between capillary action and the varnish, any serious accumulations of thinner will flow into the crevices, which is exactly what you want. Now, before your thinner dries or evaporates, take out the panel liner and apply it by gently jabbing the brush into the crevices around the details. The enamel will flow to the lowest points, and the thinner will help carry it there and keep it in place. Not only does this provide a ton of control, but it's also very fast to do. I can line in most models in a matter of minutes. Plus, it's just a really cool, satisfying process to watch. If you've never done it before, I urge you to give it a try. When it's done, everything will be quite neatly outlined in perfect black or some other dark color, and everything will be easy to read. So there you have it, 3 tips that will take your painting to the next level. No longer do you have to lament about the difference between your results and that of the pros. Why? Well, when you use complementary colors, environmental context, and you also build contrast on your models, you'll in fact be doing what the pros do as well. So you can join the ranks and produce the truly awesome miniatures you've always wanted. If you'd like to learn more about painting skin tones, please watch this video. If you're curious about painting 15mm armor, I suggest you watch this video instead. Thanks for watching. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And most importantly, remember to keep building life in miniature.